The grand ballroom of Ashbourne Palace shimmered beneath hundreds of crystal chandeliers, their golden light reflecting off polished marble floors and gilded walls. Noblemen in finely tailored coats and ladies in elegant silk gowns drifted gracefully across the dance floor as a string orchestra filled the air with beautiful waltzes. Laughter echoed through the magnificent hall, mingling with the clinking of crystal glasses and quiet conversations about politics, fortunes, and marriages. For most guests, the Prescott Winter Ball was the social event of the season. For Lady Clara Ashford, however, it was another evening of pretending not to notice the whispers that followed her wherever she went. At 22, Clara possessed a quiet beauty that did not demand attention. Her chestnut hair was pinned neatly beneath a simple silver comb, and her pale blue gown, though carefully sewn by her aunt, looked modest beside the extravagant dresses worn by wealthier ladies. Since her father's death had left the Ashford family nearly bankrupt, Clara knew she no longer belonged among the richest members of society. Still, she carried herself with quiet dignity. She smiled politely as passing nobles greeted her, though many barely concealed their pity. Across the ballroom stood a circle of fashionable young ladies, led by Lady Beatrice Hawthorne, whose family ranked among the kingdom's wealthiest. Beatrice watched Clara with narrowed eyes. "She actually came," Beatrice said with a smirk. "Perhaps she hopes some lonely gentleman will rescue her family's fortune," another lady laughed. Beatrice's lips curled into a cruel smile. "I have a better idea." The women leaned closer. "Let's see how brave our sweet Lady Clara truly is." A few moments later, Beatrice approached Clara with an unusually pleasant expression. "Lady Clara," she said warmly. "We've been speaking of your courage." Clara looked surprised. "My courage?" "Indeed," Beatrice replied. "Everyone says you're kind to everyone, regardless of reputation. I simply believe people deserve kindness." Several ladies exchanged amused glances. "Then surely," Beatrice continued, "you wouldn't fear sitting beside His Grace, the Duke of Prescott." The smile around Clara slowly faded. Everyone knew the Duke. Edmund Blackwood, Duke of Prescott. The most feared nobleman in England. He rarely attended social gatherings, never smiled, and was known for reducing powerful men to silence with a single glance. Stories surrounded him like shadows. Some claimed he had fought in distant wars. Others whispered that betrayal had stolen everyone he had ever loved. Whatever the truth, no one willingly approached him. At the far end of the ballroom, the Duke sat alone. His black evening coat matched his dark hair perfectly, while the silver embroidery on his collar marked his rank. His sharp features remained unreadable as he silently observed the dancers without speaking to anyone. Even seasoned politicians avoided disturbing him. Clara noticed the empty chair beside him. She immediately understood. This was not admiration. It was a trap. "If I refuse," Clara said softly, "you'll spend the evening calling me a coward." Beatrice smiled sweetly. "We would never." But everyone nearby was already listening. Clara lowered her eyes for a moment. Her late father had once told her, fear often gives cruel people their greatest victories. Taking a slow breath, she straightened her shoulders. "If sitting beside a gentleman is considered bravery," she said calmly, "then perhaps our society has become stranger than I realized." Without another word, she walked across the enormous ballroom. Conversation gradually faded. Guests noticed her destination. One by one, voices disappeared. Even the orchestra seemed quieter. The Duke remained perfectly still as Clara approached his table. His piercing gray eyes lifted toward her. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. "Your Grace," Clara said with a respectful curtsy. "May I?" The Duke looked at the empty chair. Then back at her. After several long seconds, he gave the smallest nod. "You may." Clara thanked him and quietly took the seat. The ballroom held its breath. Nobody had expected him to answer. For several moments they sat in silence, watching couples dance beneath the glittering chandeliers. Clara did not force conversation. She simply admired the orchestra and accepted the silence without discomfort. The Duke noticed. Most people either flattered him endlessly or fled within moments. She did neither. Finally, he spoke. "You know why they sent you here?" His voice was deep and calm. "Yes. And yet you came." "I dislike cruelty more than I dislike uncomfortable conversations." For the first time that evening, something almost invisible crossed the Duke's expression. Not quite a smile. More, curiosity. "You are unusual, Lady Ashford." "So I've been told." Silence returned, though now it felt peaceful rather than awkward. The orchestra began a new waltz. Couples stepped gracefully onto the polished floor. The Duke watched them for several seconds before slowly turning toward Clara. Around the ballroom, hundreds of eyes remained fixed upon them. Then, in a voice quiet enough that only those nearest could hear, the Duke asked, "Would you care to dance?" Clara blinked in surprise. The entire ballroom froze. Lady Beatrice's confident smile vanished instantly. Noblemen stared in disbelief. Ladies nearly dropped their fans. Even the musicians faltered before quickly finding their rhythm again. Without another word, the feared Duke of Prescott rose from his chair and extended his gloved hand toward the woman everyone had expected him to reject. And in that single unforgettable moment, the cruel dare became the beginning of a story that no one in the kingdom would ever forget. The music continued, but the ballroom no longer belonged to the dancers. Every eye followed the Duke of Prescott and Lady Clara Ashford as they stepped onto the polished marble floor. Conversations faded into hushed whispers. Noble women hid their astonishment behind delicate fans, while gentlemen exchanged puzzled glances. No one could remember the last time the Duke had asked anyone to dance, if he ever had. Clara hesitated for only a moment before placing her hand in his. His grip was firm yet surprisingly gentle. As the orchestra began a slow waltz, the Duke guided her effortlessly across the floor. His movements were confident, graceful, and practiced, revealing years of aristocratic training despite the loneliness that had become his reputation. "You dance well," Clara said softly. "I was taught long ago," he replied. "You sound as though it belonged to another lifetime." "In many ways, it did." His answer carried no bitterness, only quiet truth. Clara sensed there was a story behind those few words, but she respected the silence that followed. Around them, whispers grew louder. "Has the Duke gone mad? Who is that girl? Lady Ashford must have bewitched him." Beatrice Hawthorne clenched her jaw so tightly that her smile nearly disappeared. "This cannot be happening," she muttered. One of her friends leaned closer. "What do we do now?" Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "We wait. Men like the Duke never change." When the dance ended, the Duke bowed politely. "Thank you, Lady Ashford. The pleasure was mine, Your Grace." Instead of walking away immediately, he surprised everyone once again. "Would you join me for supper?" A wave of gasps swept through the hall. Clara noticed dozens of curious faces watching them. "If you truly wish it," she answered. "I would not have asked otherwise." Together they crossed into the grand dining chamber, where long tables overflowed with roasted meats, fresh bread, cheeses, fruit, and sparkling crystal goblets. Servants hurried to prepare a private table near one of the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens. For several minutes they ate quietly. Unlike the other guests, Clara did not fill every silence with nervous chatter. The Duke seemed to appreciate that. Finally he asked, "Are you afraid of me?" She looked at him honestly. "No. You should be, according to society. I have learned that society enjoys creating monsters out of people it does not understand." For the first time, a faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "You speak boldly. My father taught me that truth should never whisper." The Duke lowered his gaze for a moment. "He sounds like an honorable man." He was. "I'm sorry for your loss." Clara blinked. Few people had ever spoken those words with genuine sincerity. Thank you. The conversation drifted naturally after that. They spoke of books, music, horses, and the countryside surrounding Prescott Manor. To Clara's surprise, the Duke possessed a quiet wit hidden beneath his stern appearance. When she laughed at one of his dry observations, he seemed almost startled by the sound. I cannot remember, he admitted, the last time someone laughed while speaking with me. Perhaps because everyone arrives expecting to fear you. And you? I arrived expecting to meet a man. His gray eyes rested on her for several seconds. You are proving difficult to surprise, Lady Ashford. I could say the same of your grace. Across the room, Lord Henry Whitmore, an elderly nobleman and longtime friend of the Duke's late father, quietly observed them. He smiled knowingly. It is good to see him speaking again, he whispered to his wife. I had begun to believe grief had stolen his voice forever. As the evening wore on, more guests gathered near enough to overhear pieces of their conversation. Each passing minute shattered another rumor. The feared Duke was neither cruel nor arrogant. He simply spoke little. When the final dance of the evening was announced, Clara prepared to leave. I should return home before it grows too late. The Duke stood immediately. I shall escort you to your carriage. There is no need to trouble yourself. It is no trouble. Together they walked through the palace entrance into the cool winter night. Snowflakes drifted gently through the air, covering the gardens in silver. The Duke opened the carriage door himself. Clara paused before stepping inside. Thank you for your kindness this evening. He looked at her thoughtfully. No, Lady Ashford. She frowned slightly. I believe it is I who should thank you. For what? For sitting beside a man everyone else avoided. She smiled warmly. I only accepted a dare. And yet, he replied quietly, you treated me like a human being. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the carriage began to move. The Duke remained standing on the palace steps, watching until the lanterns disappeared into the snowy darkness. Unknown to them both, hidden behind an upstairs window, Lady Beatrice Hawthorne watched with growing anger. She had intended to humiliate Clara before the entire nobility. Instead, she had introduced Lady Clara Ashford to the one man whose favor every ambitious family in the kingdom secretly desired. As the Duke turned and disappeared back into the palace, Beatrice made herself a silent promise. If kindness had opened the Duke's guarded heart, jealousy would do everything in its power to close it again. The morning after the Prescott Winter Ball, Lady Clara Ashford awoke expecting the previous evening to fade into memory. Instead, it became the only topic anyone wished to discuss. Before breakfast had even ended, a servant delivered 3 handwritten invitations. Each came from noble ladies who had ignored Clara for years but now suddenly wished to enjoy her company. By midday, another visitor arrived, not with an invitation, but with questions. What was the Duke really like? Did he smile? Has he invited you to Prescott Manor? Clara answered each politely without revealing much. He was simply kind. Few believed such a simple answer. To society, Edmund Blackwood, Duke of Prescott, was a mystery too large to fit inside the word kind. 3 days later, another carriage stopped outside the modest Ashford estate. Its polished black door carried the silver crest of the Prescott family. The elderly butler stepped down and bowed respectfully. Lady Clara, His Grace requests the honor of your company for afternoon tea at Prescott Manor. Clara's aunt nearly dropped her teacup. The Duke himself invited you. So it would appear. Though surprised, Clara accepted. By early afternoon, her carriage rolled through towering iron gates and into the vast grounds of Prescott Manor. The estate was magnificent. Rolling green hills stretched beyond carefully tended gardens. Ancient oak trees lined the long stone driveway, while the manor itself rose proudly against the cloudy sky, built of gray stone with ivy climbing its walls. Yet despite its beauty, the house felt strangely quiet. almost lonely. The Duke greeted her himself at the entrance. "You found the journey comfortable?" "Very much so, Your Grace. I asked you here because I wish to thank you properly." "There is no need." "I disagree." He led her into a grand library filled with thousands of leather-bound books. A fire crackled softly in the fireplace, filling the room with warmth. "I thought you might prefer somewhere quieter than another ballroom." "I do." Tea was served, and for a while they spoke easily about literature, history, and travel. Clara noticed something unusual. Whenever conversation drifted toward the Duke's family, he became distant. His gaze settled upon a portrait hanging above the fireplace. It showed a smiling man and woman with a young boy between them. "You resemble him," Clara said gently. "My father. He looks kind." He was. Silence settled over the room. After several moments, the Duke stood and walked toward the portrait. "My family died 12 years ago." Clara remained silent, sensing he wished to continue. "The official report claimed our carriage overturned during a mountain journey." He looked directly at her. It was a lie. Clara's heart skipped. What truly happened? They were murdered. The words hung heavily in the quiet library. "I have spent 12 years allowing the kingdom to believe it was an accident." Why? Because the people responsible were among the most powerful nobles in England. Clara stared at him. "You know who they are?" "I know some. But not all." He walked toward an old writing desk and unlocked a hidden drawer. Inside rested dozens of aged letters tied together with faded blue ribbon. There are names hidden within these letters. He placed them carefully on the table. "My father kept records of financial dealings, political agreements, and private correspondence." Clara looked confused. "Why show them to me?" The Duke answered honestly. "Because you are the first person I have trusted in years." She looked up in surprise. "You barely know me." "I know enough." He sat opposite her. "Since my family's deaths, everyone who approached me wanted something. My title. My influence. My fortune." He shook his head. "You wanted none of those. I only wanted to survive an uncomfortable dinner." A quiet laugh escaped him. "So you did." His expression soon became serious again. "I need someone who sees people clearly. You noticed truths about me that others ignored. If I have overlooked something inside these letters, perhaps you will not." Clara carefully untied the ribbon and began reading. Hours passed unnoticed. Some letters discussed land purchases. Others mentioned parliamentary votes. Most seemed ordinary. Until one letter caught her attention. "There." The Duke leaned closer. "What is it?" She pointed to a signature. "Lord Victor Harrington." His face hardened. "He financed the investigation into your family's accident. And this letter was written 6 months before their deaths." She continued reading. "It mentions your father refusing to sign something called the Ashmore Agreement." The Duke slowly stood. No one has spoken that name aloud in over a decade. "So it matters." "It matters very much." Another letter slipped from between the pages. Neither of them had noticed it before. Inside was a small hand-drawn map with several locations marked in red ink. The Duke unfolded it carefully. One location was circled twice. Black Hollow Chapel. "What is that place?" Clara asked. "My father owned it. And no one has visited it since his death." The room suddenly felt colder. At that very moment, a servant hurried into the library, his face pale. "Your Grace." The Duke turned immediately. "What is it?" "A writer has just arrived." He refused to give his name. "But he left this." The servant handed over a sealed envelope. The Duke broke the wax seal. Inside was only one sentence. Stop searching for the truth, or Lady Clara Ashford will be the next to disappear. The Duke's face turned to stone. Clara felt a chill run through her body. Until that moment, she had believed she was helping uncover an old mystery. Now she realized something terrifying. The people responsible for the murders were still watching. And somehow, they already knew her name. The threatening letter remained on the library table long after the servant had left. Neither Clara nor the Duke spoke for several moments. The crackling fireplace was the only sound in the room. Finally, Clara looked up. They know we're searching. The Duke folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. That means we're getting close. You don't seem surprised. I expected they would notice eventually. He walked toward the window overlooking the manor grounds. Outside, dark clouds gathered over the hills, and a cold wind bent the branches of the ancient oak trees. I simply hoped they wouldn't involve you. Clara stood beside him. You warned me this would be dangerous. I did. And I chose to stay. The Duke turned toward her, his usually unreadable face filled with concern. If anything happens to you because of this, it won't be your fault. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Neither needed to say what had slowly grown between them over the past weeks. It was no longer simple friendship. It was trust. Before either could speak again, another servant entered. Your Grace, a royal messenger has arrived. The messenger carried a letter bearing the king's golden seal. The Duke broke the wax and read silently. The king is hosting a grand spring reception in 3 nights. Clara smiled faintly. I imagine every noble family will attend. They always do. His expression darkened. So will the people who sent this threat. 3 evenings later, the royal palace glittered with even greater splendor than the Prescott Winter Ball. Crystal chandeliers illuminated endless marble halls. Musicians performed elegant melodies while nobles from every corner of the kingdom filled the magnificent ballroom. The king wished the evening to celebrate unity among England's greatest families. Instead, someone had planned something very different. As the Duke and Clara entered together, conversations immediately stopped. Heads turned. Whispers spread like wildfire. They arrived together. Has he chosen her? Surely he intends to marry. Across the ballroom, Lady Beatrice Hawthorne watched with barely hidden fury. Beside her stood Lord Victor Harrington, a powerful court advisor whose calm smile concealed sharp ambition. You promised this girl would disappear quietly, Beatrice whispered. Victor glanced toward Clara. Patience. The evening has only begun. The celebration continued smoothly until the king invited everyone into the grand gallery for an announcement. As servants poured wine, Lord Victor stepped forward. Your Majesty. I regret interrupting such a joyful evening. But I believe the court deserves to know an unfortunate truth. The room fell silent. Victor slowly produced several folded documents. It pains me to reveal that Lady Clara Ashford has been secretly encouraging the Duke of Prescott to accuse innocent noble families of terrible crimes. Gasps echoed across the hall. Victor continued. Even worse. He lifted another paper. She has accepted expensive gifts from His Grace while privately telling others she intends to become Duchess of Prescott. Several nobles exchanged shocked looks. Lady Beatrice lowered her eyes, pretending sadness. I feared this might happen. Another woman sighed dramatically. The poor Duke. He has been manipulated. Clara stared in disbelief. Those papers are false. Victor smiled politely. Are they? He handed one document to the king's chamberlain. The handwriting appears convincing. Another lord nodded. I have heard similar rumors. Within moments, whispers became accusations. Fortune hunter. Social climber. She trapped him. The Duke stepped forward. Enough. His deep voice silenced the room. Lady Clara has done nothing dishonorable. Victor bowed respectfully. Your Grace, your affection has clouded your judgment. I simply wish to protect both your title and the dignity of this court. Several influential nobles supported Victor. Perhaps Lady Ashford should leave until the matter is investigated. It would avoid unnecessary scandal. Clara looked around the crowded hall. Only a handful of faces showed sympathy. Most watched with curiosity. Others with satisfaction. She finally understood. This had been carefully planned. Not only to destroy her reputation, but to isolate the Duke from the one person he trusted. Slowly, Clara turned toward him. Your Grace. No. He already knew what she intended. I will not allow this. She smiled sadly. If I remain, they will continue attacking you. They can attack me. They already are. She gently placed her gloved hand over his. You once told me your enemies wanted your title. They cannot take that. But they can use me to weaken you. The Duke's jaw tightened. I don't care what society believes. I do. She lowered her voice. You have spent 12 years rebuilding your family's honor. I won't become the reason it is questioned. Without waiting for another argument, Clara curtsied before the king. Your Majesty, until these accusations are resolved, I shall withdraw from court voluntarily. The king nodded solemnly. A wise decision. The Duke watched helplessly as Clara walked through the enormous ballroom. The same guests who had admired her only weeks before now stepped aside, whispering behind elegant fans. No one stopped her. No one defended her. Outside the palace, rain had begun to fall. Clara climbed into her carriage without looking back. From the palace steps, the Duke stood motionless as the carriage disappeared into the darkness. Inside the grand gallery, Lord Victor allowed himself the smallest smile. The girl is gone, Beatrice whispered. Victor's smile faded almost immediately. No. You misunderstand. He watched the Duke with careful eyes. The game has only begun. Across the hall, the Duke slowly turned to face the nobles who had remained silent while Clara's name was destroyed. His gray eyes held none of the quiet restraint they had once known. For the first time in many years, the Duke of Prescott no longer looked like a man protecting his peace. He looked like a man preparing for war. And everyone in the royal court suddenly realized they had made a very dangerous enemy. For 3 days after the scandal at the royal court, the kingdom buzzed with gossip. Every drawing room, marketplace, and noble estate repeated the same story. Lady Clara Ashford had disappeared from society. Some claimed she had confessed to deceiving the Duke of Prescott. Others insisted she had fled England altogether. Newspapers hinted at scandal without revealing the truth, and ambitious nobles eagerly spread rumors that grew more outrageous with every telling. Only one man remained silent. The Duke of Prescott. He cancelled every social engagement, ignored countless invitations, and locked himself inside the study at Prescott Manor. To the outside world, it appeared he had accepted defeat. But inside the manor, the Duke was preparing for battle. His massive oak desk was covered with letters, maps, account books, and family records. Lord Henry Whitmore and 2 loyal investigators worked beside him day and night, comparing signatures, dates, and financial ledgers collected over the past 12 years. Late one evening, Lord Henry rushed into the study, holding an old leather-bound journal. Edmund, he said, unable to hide his excitement. I found it. The Duke looked up. The steward's journal? Henry nodded. It was hidden behind a loose stone in the chapel at Black Hollow. The Duke quickly opened the worn journal. Every page had been written by Thomas Evans, his father's trusted steward. The entries described secret meetings between Lord Victor Harrington and several powerful nobles who wanted the Duke's father to sign the Ashmore Agreement, a document that would allow them to seize valuable lands belonging to smaller families. When the Duke's father refused, the journal revealed the horrifying truth. The carriage accident had been carefully planned. Bribes had been paid. Witnesses had been silenced. Even the royal investigator had been secretly working for Lord Victor. The Duke closed the journal slowly. 12 years, he whispered. They murdered my family for greed. Lord Henry placed another document on the desk. There is more. It was a copy of Clara's supposed letters, the same ones used to accuse her at court. The Duke examined them carefully. Within moments, he noticed several inconsistencies. The handwriting imitates hers, he said. But the ink is wrong. Henry frowned. Wrong? This type of ink was imported only 6 months ago. He compared the letters with one Clara had genuinely written. The paper also comes from Harrington's own supplier. Henry smiled. So the evidence against Lady Clara is forged. It always was. The Duke stood. Prepare my carriage. Where are we going? To the palace. The following evening, the king summoned the royal court once again. Every noble family attended, expecting another discussion of trade and taxation. Instead, they found the Duke of Prescott standing alone in the center of the grand gallery. His black formal coat bore the silver crest of his family. His expression was calm. Cold. Unshakable. The king addressed him. You requested this audience, Your Grace. I did, Your Majesty. And you claim to possess evidence regarding the recent accusations. I possess the truth. The room fell silent. Lord Victor Harrington smiled confidently. I welcome any investigation. The Duke met his eyes. So do I. He raised the steward's journal. My father's steward recorded every meeting leading to my family's murder. Gasps swept through the hall. One by one, the Duke presented documents before the king's advisors. Financial records. Secret correspondence. Bank payments. Witness statements. Finally, he displayed the forged letters used against Clara. The handwriting was copied. The ink did not exist when these letters were supposedly written. The paper was purchased by Lord Victor's own estate. Royal scribes examined each piece of evidence carefully. One elderly handwriting expert adjusted his spectacles before speaking. They are indeed forgeries, Your Majesty. Another investigator added, the financial records matched the steward's journal perfectly. The king's face darkened. He turned toward Lord Victor. What answer do you have? For the first time in years, Victor had none. His confident smile vanished. Royal Guard stepped forward. By the king's command, Lord Victor Harrington and his closest conspirators were arrested before the entire court. Heavy iron shackles replaced jeweled cuffs. The same nobles who had praised Victor only days before now avoided meeting his eyes. Justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. There remains one final matter, the Duke said. The king nodded. Proceed. The Duke turned toward the palace entrance. The enormous doors opened. Lady Clara Ashford entered quietly, wearing a simple pale blue gown. She had expected only to witness the proceedings, not to become part of them. The Duke walked toward her. Every noble watched in complete silence. He stopped only a few feet away. Lady Clara. She smiled gently. You've cleared my name. It should never have needed clearing. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, the Duke slowly removed one black glove and lowered himself onto one knee. A wave of shocked whispers filled the gallery. The most feared man in England knelt before the woman society had mocked. He looked up at her with complete sincerity. When we first met, you sat beside me because of a cruel dare. You saw kindness where everyone else saw fear. You trusted me before I deserved it. You reminded me that my life did not end 12 years ago. His voice softened. I cannot change the past. But I wish to spend my future with you. From his pocket, He removed a small velvet box containing a beautiful sapphire ring that had belonged to his mother. Lady Clara Ashford. Will you do me the greatest honor of becoming my wife? Tears filled Clara's eyes. For a long moment, she simply looked at him, the man who had once hidden behind silence, now offering his heart before the entire kingdom. Then she smiled. Yes. A joyful cheer erupted throughout the hall. Even the king rose to applaud. The same ballroom that had once whispered cruel rumors now echoed with celebration. As the Duke gently placed the sapphire ring upon Clara's finger, he realized that justice had given him more than the truth about his past. It had given him the hope of a future. And everyone present knew they had just witnessed a moment that would be remembered in the kingdom's history for generations. 6 months after the royal court had exposed Lord Victor Harrington's conspiracy, the kingdom looked very different. The corrupt noble families who had ruled through fear and deception had lost their influence. Their estates were placed under royal supervision, and many of the lands they had seized unfairly were returned to the families who rightfully owned them. For the first time in years, people believed that justice had prevailed over power. At the heart of that change stood the Duke and Duchess of Prescott. Their wedding was held in the small stone chapel on the grounds of Prescott Manor rather than in the grand cathedral many nobles had expected. Clara had insisted on a simple ceremony surrounded by the people who had stood by them during their darkest days. The chapel was decorated with fresh white roses and blue wildflowers gathered from the manor gardens. Sunlight streamed through the stained-glass windows as friends, loyal servants, neighboring villagers, and a handful of trusted nobles filled the pews. The king himself attended, not as a ruler seeking attention but as a friend honoring two people whose courage had restored faith in the kingdom. When Clara walked down the aisle in an elegant ivory gown, the Duke could not take his eyes off her. Only months earlier, she had entered a ballroom alone, mocked by those who believed kindness was weakness. Now she walked toward him with quiet confidence, admired by an entire kingdom. As they exchanged vows, the Duke held both of her hands. "I once believed my heart had been buried with my family," he said softly. "You reminded me that love asks us to live, not merely to remember." Clara smiled through tears. "And you taught me that even the strongest walls can become doors when someone chooses trust over fear." The chapel echoed with applause as they were pronounced husband and wife. Life at Prescott Manor soon changed in ways no one had imagined. For years, the estate had been known as the home of the kingdom's coldest nobleman. Visitors had entered its gates with caution, expecting silence and stern faces. Under Clara's guidance, that reputation slowly disappeared. She reopened the manor gardens to local families each spring. She transformed unused rooms into a school where village children learned to read and write. The manor kitchens prepared warm meals every week for widows, orphans, and elderly neighbors who struggled through difficult seasons. The servants noticed the difference first. Laughter could now be heard echoing through the hallways. Fresh flowers decorated every room. Music returned to the drawing room each evening. Even the Duke's enormous library, once a place of lonely silence, became a favorite gathering place where Clara hosted readings for children and invited scholars from across the kingdom to share their knowledge. The Duke watched these changes with quiet admiration. "You've somehow made this enormous house feel like a home," he told her one evening. Clara slipped her hand into his. "It was always a home. It simply needed people to fill it with love." One crisp autumn afternoon, the Duke and Clara visited the cemetery where his parents rested beneath two ancient oak trees. The Duke carried a bouquet of white lilies, his mother's favorite flowers. For several moments, neither spoke. Then he knelt before the headstones. "Father. Mother. The truth is finally known. No lies remain." He placed the flowers gently beside the graves. "I used to visit you filled with anger. Today, I come with peace." Clara rested a comforting hand on his shoulder. "They would be proud of you." He looked at her and smiled. "They would be proud of us." As they walked back toward the manor, the heavy burden he had carried for 12 years seemed lighter than ever before. His past would always be part of him. But it no longer controlled his future. That winter, another grand ball was held at Ashbourne Palace. It was the first time the Duke and Duchess had returned to the very ballroom where their story had begun. The chandeliers sparkled just as brightly. The orchestra played the same elegant waltzes. Many of the guests remembered the night when a frightened young woman had been dared to sit beside the most feared man in the room. This time, however, no whispers followed them. Instead, they were welcomed with warm smiles and respectful bows. Even Lady Beatrice Hawthorne approached Clara with lowered eyes. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I judged you unfairly." Clara smiled with her usual kindness. "We all have the chance to become better than we were yesterday." Beatrice nodded gratefully before stepping away. The Duke looked at his wife with admiration. "I don't know how you forgive so easily." She laughed softly. "Because carrying kindness is much lighter than carrying resentment." He chuckled. "You continue to surprise me. And you continue to smile more often. I believe that is entirely your fault." As the orchestra began the evening's first waltz, the Duke extended his hand just as he had on the night they first met. "Would you care to dance, Your Grace?" Clara placed her hand in his. "I thought you'd never ask." Together they glided across the ballroom floor, surrounded by family, friends, and a kingdom that had witnessed the extraordinary journey from fear to hope. The same ballroom that had once watched a cruel dare unfold now witnessed a love that had transformed lives. Years later, people would still tell the story of the night when a lonely young woman accepted a dare to sit beside the most feared man in the room. They would remember how courage defeated cruelty, how truth overcame deception, and how kindness reached a heart that everyone else had abandoned. For history would never remember the Duke of Prescott as the kingdom's most feared man. It would remember him as the man whose life was forever changed by the one woman who chose to see not the legend everyone feared, but the lonely soul who simply needed someone to believe in him. And that became the greatest legacy either of them could have hoped to leave behind.